The morning mist clung to the ancient mountains of Draconia like a shroud of shame. High above the crystal spires and floating cities of the Dragon Realm, a lone figure sat at the edge of a crumbling cliff. Her scales, once brilliant emerald, had dulled to the color of old copper. Her right wing hung useless at her side, twisted and malformed from birth. Zephyra had always been different. While other dragon hatchlings took to the skies within days of emerging from their shells, she had remained earthbound. The wing that should have carried her through clouds and starlight was nothing more than a cruel reminder of what she would never be. In a society where flight meant everything, status, power, purpose, she was nothing. The other dragons whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Broken Wing, they called her. Earthcrawler, the shame of the Windcaller clan. Her own mother, the mighty Tempest Windcaller, could barely look at her without disappointment clouding her golden eyes. Today was the choosing day, when young dragons would be selected for their life paths. Warriors, scholars, merchants, or craftsmen, all noble pursuits for those who could soar between the floating cities. Zephyr knew she wouldn't be chosen for anything. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life, the moment when her people would finally cast her aside completely. The ceremony took place in the Grand Amphitheater, a massive structure carved from a single mountain peak. Hundreds of dragons filled the terraced seats, their scales creating a rainbow of colors that caught the morning light. At the center, the Council of Elders perched on crystalline thrones, their ancient eyes surveying the young dragons who stood in perfect formation below. Zephyra stood at the back, trying to make herself invisible. Her twisted wing ached in the cold mountain air, a constant reminder of her inadequacy. She watched as one by one, her clutchmates were called forward and assigned their destinies. Karath Flameborn, son of the Fire Mountains, you shall join the Sky Guard, protectors of our realm. Applause thundered through the amphitheater as the crimson-scaled dragon spread his magnificent wings and took flight, circling the arena in a display of aerial mastery that left the crowd breathless. Ligia Starweaver, daughter of the Night Winds, you are called to the Scholar's Circle, keeper of ancient knowledge. The elegant blue dragon bowed gracefully before ascending to the floating platform where the scholars waited, her wings catching the light like captured starlight. One by one, Zephyr's peers found their places in dragon society. Warriors, healers, artisans, diplomats, all had their moment of glory, their acceptance into the great tapestry of their civilization. All except her. When a last name was called, and the ceremony began to wind down, Zephyra felt the familiar ache of exclusion settle in her chest like a stone. She turned to leave, hoping to slip away unnoticed, when Elder Pyritha's voice boomed across the amphitheater. Zephyra Windcaller. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye turned to her, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Slowly, she made her way to the center of the arena, her claws clicking against the stone floor in the oppressive quiet. Elder Pyrith looked down at her with ancient, unreadable eyes. For a moment, Zephyra thought perhaps they had found some role for her, some small corner of dragon society where even a broken-winged outcast might belong. Zephyra Windcaller, the elder repeated, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. You are deemed unfit for any position within our society. You bring shame to your clan and weakness to our people. You are hereby exiled from Draconia, never to return. The words hit her like physical blows. Gasps echoed through the crowd, though whether from shock or satisfaction, she couldn't tell. Her mother sat in the nobles section, her head turned away, unable or unwilling to meet her daughter's eyes. You have one day to leave our lands, Elder Pyrith continued. Take nothing but what you can carry. Your name will be struck from the clan records. You are no longer Windcaller. You are no longer dragon. Zephyra stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. Around her, the whispers began, excited, vindictive, relieved. The broken dragon was finally being removed, like a diseased limb being amputated to save the body. She managed a small bow. though it took every ounce of her remaining dignity. "I understand, Elder." Without another word, she turned and walked from the amphitheater. Behind her, the ceremony continued as if nothing had happened, as if she had never existed at all. The journey down the mountain was the longest of her life. Each step took her further from everything she had ever known, from the crystal spires and floating gardens, from the song of wind through ancient stones, from the laughter of hatchlings playing in the clouds she would never touch. By evening, she reached the borderlands where the dragon realm met the vast wilderness beyond. Here, the manicured beauty of Draconia gave way to wild forests and untamed rivers. It was beautiful in its own way, but it felt alien to her dragon's senses. She found shelter in a cave that night, curling up on the cold stone floor. For the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to cry. Great, heaving sobs that echoed through the cavern and frightened away the small creatures that lived in the darkness. When morning came, she forced herself to continue. There was no point in looking back, no point in hoping for rescue or redemption. She was alone now, more completely than any dragon in the history of her people. The days blended together as she traveled deeper into the wilderness. She learned to hunt small game, to find water, to build rudimentary shelters. Her pride as a dragon meant nothing here. She was simply another creature trying to survive. It was on the seventh day that she first encountered signs of human settlement. Smoke rising from beyond a hill, the distant sound of metal striking metal, the scent of cooked meat that made her stomach growl with hunger. Dragons and humans had little contact. Occasionally, diplomatic missions crossed between their realms, but for the most part, the two species kept to themselves. Dragons viewed humans as short-lived and primitive, while humans saw dragons as dangerous and incomprehensible. Zephyra knew she should avoid the human settlement. A dragon, even a broken one, might be seen as a threat, but she was so tired, so hungry, and so desperately lonely that she found herself drawn toward the smoke. She crested the hill and looked down at a small farming village nestled in the valley below. Neat rows of crops stretched across the fertile soil, and she could see humans moving between simple wooden buildings. It looked peaceful, productive, and utterly foreign to her dragon sensibilities. As she watched, a commotion erupted near the edge of the village. A group of humans was pointing and shouting, and following their gaze, Zephyr saw what had alarmed them. A pack of shadow wolves had emerged from the forest, their dark forms rippling like liquid night as they approached the village's livestock. Shadow wolves were dangerous predators, creatures of dark magic that could phase in and out of reality. Even healthy dragons avoided them when possible. These humans, with their simple tools and fragile bodies, would be slaughtered if the wolves reached them. Zephyra watched the scene unfold below, telling herself it wasn't her concern. She was no longer a dragon, no longer bound by their codes of honor and protection. She was just a broken exile with her own survival to worry about. But as she saw a small human child stumble and fall while trying to flee from the approaching wolves, something stirred in her chest. It wasn't dragon pride or duty. It was something more basic, more fundamental. It was the simple recognition that the strong should protect the weak, regardless of species or circumstances. Before she fully realized what she was doing, Zephyr was charging down the hillside. Her twisted wing made her movement awkward and unbalanced, but her legs were strong, and her claws were sharp. The shadow wolves saw her coming and turned to face this new threat, their eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. The first wolf lunged at her, its form shifting between solid and ethereal. Zephyra twisted aside, her claws raking across its flank as it materialized. Dark blood sprayed across the ground, and the wolf howled in pain and fury. Two more wolves circled her, looking for openings. She couldn't fly, couldn't use the aerial tactics that made dragons such formidable opponents. Instead, she had to rely on her ground-based fighting skills, honed through years of frustration and anger. She breathed fire, a great gout of flame that forced the wolves back. One of them tried to phase through the fire and found that dragon flame burned even ethereal flesh. It materialized with its fur ablaze, rolling desperately to extinguish the flames. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Without the ability to fly, Zephyra had to endure attacks she could have easily avoided in the air. Wolf claws raked across her scales, leaving deep gouges that bled freely. But she fought with a ferocity born of desperation and purpose. When the last wolf limped away into the forest, Zephyra collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. Her entire body ached, and she could feel blood dripping from numerous wounds. But the humans were safe. The child who had fallen was being comforted by what appeared to be his mother. She expected them to flee now, to run from the dragon who had appeared so suddenly in their midst. Instead, she found herself surrounded by curious faces, human eyes looking at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. An older human stepped forward, a man with gray hair and calloused hands. He approached slowly, carefully, as one might approach a wounded animal. "Thank you," he said simply. The words were in the common tongue, a language dragons learned for diplomatic purposes, but rarely used. "You saved our children." Zephyra tried to respond, but found her voice caught in her throat. When had anyone last thanked her for anything? When had her actions been seen as heroic rather than pitiful? "You're hurt," the man continued, gesturing to her wounds. "Will you let us help you?" She should refuse. She should retreat to the wilderness and continue her solitary existence. But, looking into the man's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in her own people's gazes for years: respect. "I don't know if your medicine works on dragons," she managed to say. The man smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face. "We won't know until we try, will we? I'm Thomas, by the way. Thomas Carpenter." "I am." She began, then stopped. She was no longer Zephyra Windcaller. That name had been taken from her. "I am just Zephyra." "Well, just Zephyra," Thomas said with gentle humor. "Let's get you patched up." What followed was unlike anything she had experienced in her dragon upbringing. The humans brought water and clean cloths, strange-smelling ointments, and bandages made of soft fabric. They worked carefully around her scales, treating her wounds with a gentle efficiency that spoke of experience with both farm animals and each other. A woman named Sarah brought her food, not the live prey that dragons typically hunted, but cooked meat seasoned with herbs she didn't recognize. It was surprisingly good, and her empty stomach accepted it gratefully. As evening fell, the villagers brought blankets and made a comfortable resting place for her near the village center. Children who had been terrified hours earlier now peeked out from behind their parents, their fear replaced by curiosity. "Why did you help us?" Thomas asked as he sat beside her, sharing what he called tea, a hot, fragrant drink that warmed her from the inside. The question was more complex than it seemed. Why had she helped them? It certainly wasn't dragon duty. Dragons felt no particular obligation to protect humans. It wasn't strategy. She gained nothing from the encounter except wounds and attention she didn't need. "Because it was right," she said finally. "Because you were in danger, and I could help." Thomas nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. "Where will you go now?" It was a question she couldn't answer because she didn't know. She had no destination, no purpose beyond simple survival. She was a dragon without a sky, a creature designed for soaring who would spend the rest of her life earthbound. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm between homes." There was something in her voice that made Thomas study her more carefully. Perhaps he heard the loneliness, the sense of displacement that no amount of brave words could hide. "You could stay here," he said quietly, "for a while at least, until you figure out where you want to go." The offer was so unexpected that she almost didn't believe she'd heard it correctly. "Stay? Here? Why not? You proved today that you're willing to protect this community. We could use someone like that. And, frankly, after seeing what you can do, I doubt anyone would dare threaten this village while you're here." Other villagers had gathered around them during this conversation, and she saw nods of agreement on their faces. These people, who had every reason to fear and distrust a dragon, were offering her sanctuary. I'm not like other dragons, she felt compelled to warn them. I can't fly. I'm considered defective by my own people. A young woman named Elena stepped forward. She walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on a wooden crutch. Defective? She said with a slight smile. Join the club. But just because something doesn't work the way it's supposed, it doesn't mean it's useless. Elena's words hit her with unexpected force. Here was a human who clearly struggled with physical limitations, yet she spoke without shame or self-pity. She seemed to have found purpose and acceptance despite her challenges. Think about it, Thomas said. The offer stands for as long as you need it. That night, as Zephyra lay beneath the unfamiliar stars, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. Hope. Not the desperate hope for her wing to somehow heal itself, but a different kind of hope. The hope that perhaps there was a place in the world for a broken dragon after all. The village was called Haven's Rest, she learned over the following days. It had been founded 50 years earlier by a group of humans seeking to build a peaceful community away from the political turmoil of the larger human cities. They grew their own food, made their own tools, and governed themselves through council meetings where every adult had a voice. It was Zephyra realized everything the Dragon Society claimed to be, but wasn't. Here, contribution mattered more than birth. Kindness was valued over power. And perhaps most importantly, differences weren't seen as flaws to be eliminated, but as unique strengths to be appreciated. She found herself settling into village life with surprising ease. Her dragon strength made many tasks simpler. She could plow fields that would take humans hours to clear, carry loads that required multiple villagers working together, and her keen senses made her an excellent scout and guard. But it was the small interactions that meant the most. Children who brought her flowers and asked her to tell stories about dragons. Adults who included her in their evening conversations as naturally as if she had always belonged. The gradual transformation from grateful stranger to accepted community member. 3 weeks after her arrival, as she helped Thomas repair a damaged barn roof, he asked the question that had probably been on everyone's minds. What happened, Zephyra? How did you end up alone out here? She could have deflected, changed the subject, or given some vague answer. Instead, she found herself telling him everything. The shame of her malformed wing, the years of exclusion and mockery, the final humiliation of exile. She told him about Dragon Society's obsession with perfection, about her mother's disappointment, about the ceremony where she had been stripped of name and clan. Thomas listened without interruption, his weathered face growing more thoughtful as her story progressed. When she finished, he was quiet for several minutes, continuing to work on the roof repairs while he processed what she had told him. Their loss, he said finally. What? Their loss, he repeated. They threw away someone capable of what you did with those shadow wolves. Someone willing to risk herself for strangers. Someone with your strength and character. That's not wisdom. That's stupidity. His words were simple, direct, and utterly without pity. He wasn't trying to comfort her or minimize her pain. He was stating what he saw as an obvious fact, and somehow that made his opinion more valuable than any elaborate speech could have been. In Haven's Rest, he continued, we judge people by what they do, not by what they can't do. And what you've done since arriving here tells us everything we need to know about who you are. As if summoned by their conversation, Elena approached the barn, her crutch clicking against the hard-packed earth. She looked up at them working on the roof and smiled. How's it going up there? Almost finished, Thomas called down. Zephyr has been a tremendous help. We would have taken twice as long without her. Elena nodded approvingly. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Actually, the council met last night, and we have a proposition for you, Zephyra. Zephyra felt her heart skip a beat. A proposition from the village council? Was this where they politely asked her to move on? Had her usefulness worn out its welcome? We'd like to offer you an official position, Elena continued. Village guardian. It would come with a house of your own, a share in the communal harvest, and a formal voice in council meetings. The hammer slipped from Zephyra's claws, and clattered to the roof. A formal position? A house? A voice in governance? I don't understand, she managed. Elena's expression grew more serious. Zephyra, in the 3 weeks since you arrived, we've had 0 predator problems. The shadow wolves haven't returned. The mountain cats that used to steal our livestock have moved on. Word is spreading that Haven's Rest is under the protection of a dragon. Our crops are growing better because you've been able to clear larger fields. Our construction projects are finishing faster because of your strength. But more than that, Thomas added from beside her, you've become part of this community. The children adore you. The adults respect you. You attend our festivals, help with our problems, and contribute to our discussions. You're not just living here, you're belonging here. Zephyra felt tears pricking at her eyes. Belonging. When was the last time she had belonged anywhere? The position is yours if you want it, Elena said gently. But there's no pressure. If you still want to search for your place in the world, we understand. The offer will remain open. Looking down at their expectant faces, Zephyra realized that she had already found her place in the world. It wasn't in the crystal spires of Draconia or the floating cities of her birth. It was here, in this simple human village, among people who valued her for who she was rather than dismissing her for what she wasn't. I accept, she said, and the words felt like the most important she had ever spoken. The celebration that night was small, but heartfelt. The entire village gathered in the central square, sharing food and drink and stories. Zephyra found herself at the center of it all, no longer the broken exile, but the newest official member of Haven's Rest. As the evening wound down and the stars emerged overhead, she looked up at the sky she would never fly through and found that for the first time in her life, she didn't mind being earthbound. She had found something better than flight. She had found home. 6 months had passed since Zephyra accepted the position of village guardian, and Haven's Rest had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. What had once been a small, struggling farming community was now thriving beyond the villagers' wildest dreams. The changes began with security. Word had indeed spread that the village was under dragon protection, and as a result, bandit raids had ceased entirely. Dangerous creatures avoided the area, sensing the presence of an apex predator. Trade caravans that had once bypassed the village now stopped regularly, knowing they could rest safely within its borders. But Zephyra's contributions went far beyond mere protection. Her dragon strength had enabled infrastructure projects that would have been impossible for the humans alone. She had helped excavate a new well that reached deeper, cleaner water sources. Her ability to carry massive stones had allowed for the construction of a proper bridge over the creek that divided the village. Most importantly, her keen senses had led to the discovery of iron deposits in the nearby hills. The iron discovery had changed everything. Thomas, who had experience with metalworking from his youth in the larger cities, had established a small forge. Within months, they were producing tools and weapons of a quality that attracted buyers from neighboring settlements. Haven's Rest was no longer just a farming village. It was becoming a significant trade hub. Zephyra stood on the newly constructed watchtower, surveying the bustling activity below. The village had nearly doubled in size as word of prosperity and safety attracted new settlers. Families arrived weekly, seeking the peaceful life that Haven's Rest offered. Quite a view, isn't it? Elena's voice came from behind her. The young woman had climbed the tower despite her disability, something she did regularly as part of her duties as the newly elected trade coordinator. It's remarkable, Zephyra replied, turning to face her friend. Sometimes I can barely believe this is the same place I stumbled into half a year ago. Elena joined her at the tower's edge, looking out over the expanded settlement. The council meeting is about to start. We need to discuss the delegation from Westmarch. Zephyra nodded, though she felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. The delegation from Westmarch represented the first formal diplomatic contact between Haven's Rest and one of the major human cities. It was a sign of their growing importance, but it also brought new complications. They climbed down from the tower and walked toward the council hall, another recent addition to the village. It was a simple but dignified building, constructed with the fine stone that Zephyra had helped quarry from the mountainside. The council hall was packed when they arrived. All 15 members of the village council were present, along with several other important community members. At the head of the room sat the three-person delegation from Westmarch, their fine clothes and formal bearing marking them as representatives of serious political power. Thomas called the meeting to order and gestured toward their guests. Lord Chancellor Marcus, Ambassador Sarah Chun, and military advisor Colonel James Hartwell have traveled 3 days to meet with us. Lord Chancellor, please share your proposal. Lord Chancellor Marcus stood, a tall man with graying hair and shrewd eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Citizens of Haven's Rest, Westmarch has been watching your remarkable growth with great interest. Your village has achieved something extraordinary: prosperity, security, and influence that rivals settlements 3 times your size. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Zephyra. We understand that this success is largely due to your unique guardian. A dragon willing to protect human interests is unprecedented in our history. Zephyra felt uncomfortable under his scrutiny. There was something calculating in his expression that reminded her unpleasantly of the dragon elders who had cast her out. Westmarch would like to offer you an alliance, the Lord Chancellor continued. Full protection under our military umbrella, preferential trade agreements, and significant investment in your infrastructure. In exchange, we ask for 3 things: exclusive trading rights for your iron production, a permanent garrison of Westmarch soldiers to ensure stability, and the services of your Dragon Guardian for special projects. The room fell silent. Zephyra could feel tension radiating from the council members. This wasn't the partnership offer they had hoped for. It was barely disguised conquest. Thomas was the first to speak. What kind of special projects would require Zephyra's involvement? Colonel Hartwell answered this time, his military bearing evident in every word. Border disputes, bandit strongholds, diplomatic shows of force. Having a dragon available for such operations would be invaluable for regional stability. You want to use her as a weapon, Elena said flatly, to intimidate your enemies. Ambassador Chen smiled diplomatically. We prefer to think of it as leveraging available assets for the greater good. Your dragon's reputation alone would prevent many conflicts from escalating to violence. And if I refuse? Zephyra asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Lord Chancellor Marcus's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Naturally, we hope that won't be necessary, he said smoothly. But Westmarch has significant influence in this region. Trade routes, military protection, diplomatic recognition. All of these things flow through our city. It would be unfortunate if Haven's Rest found itself isolated from these benefits. The threat was clear despite the polite language. Submit or face economic and military pressure that could destroy everything they had built. Thomas stood slowly, his weathered face set in grim lines. We appreciate your offer, Lord Chancellor, but the Council needs time to discuss this proposal. Perhaps you could return tomorrow for our answer. Of course, Marcus replied, though his tone suggested this was merely a formality. We've taken rooms at your inn. We'll look forward to your response. After the delegation left, the council chamber erupted in heated discussion. Some members were terrified of refusing such a powerful city-state. Others were outraged at what amounted to extortion. The debate continued for hours, with voices raised and tempers flaring. Through it all, Zephyra remained silent, listening to the humans argue about her fate. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once again, others were deciding what role she would play in the world, what value she had to offer. Finally, Thomas called for order. We need to hear from the person most affected by this decision. Zephyra, what are your thoughts? All eyes turned to her. These people who had given her a home, a purpose, a place to belong, they were looking to her for guidance in protecting that home. 6 months ago, I was nothing, she began, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. Cast out by my own people, alone and broken. You took me in not because I was useful, but because I was in need. You gave me a home not because of what I could do for you, but because of who I was. She stood, facing the assembled council members. Now someone wants to use me as a tool of intimidation and conquest. They want to turn what we've built here into just another extension of their power. They're offering you security and wealth in exchange for your independence. The choice isn't mine to make, she continued. This is your village, your community. But I will say this. I would rather face 1,000 shadow wolves than betray the trust you've shown me. Whatever you decide, I'll stand by it. Elena raised her hand. I call for a vote. All in favor of rejecting Westmarch's offer. Hands shot up around the room. Not all of them, but a clear majority. The message was unmistakable. Haven's Rest would not surrender its independence, regardless of the consequences. Then, it's settled, Thomas said grimly. Tomorrow we tell them no. The next morning's confrontation was brief, but intense. Lord Chancellor Marcus listened to their refusal with cold courtesy, his face betraying no surprise. I'm disappointed, he said finally, but perhaps not surprised. Prosperity often breeds arrogance in small communities. You'll have time to reconsider when the realities of your situation become clear. Is that a threat? Thomas asked. Merely an observation, Marcus replied smoothly. Good day, citizens. I suspect we'll speak again soon. After the delegation departed, an emergency council meeting was called. The mood was somber as they discussed what they could expect from Westmarch's retaliation. They'll start with economic pressure, Elena predicted. Cut off trade routes, pressure other settlements not to deal with us. Then, military action, added Marcus Webb, the village's former soldier. Nothing direct at first. Bandit raids that they'll be mysteriously unable to prevent. Aggressive border patrols. Building pressure until we beg for their protection. Thomas nodded grimly. The question is, can we survive it? We have advantages they don't expect, Zephyr said thoughtfully. They see me as a weapon to be controlled, but I'm more than that. I know this land now, know every cave and stream for miles around. And I'm not alone. What do you mean? Elena asked. Zephyr smiled, an expression that would have been terrifying to their enemies, but was somehow reassuring to her friends. I mean, it's time for Haven's Rest to show the world what humans and dragons can accomplish together. The first test came within a week. A merchant caravan that had regularly traded with Haven's Rest was turned back at the Westmarch border. 2 other trading partners sent apologetic messages explaining that they could no longer risk angering such a powerful city-state. But Zephyr had a solution. Using her ability to travel quickly over rough terrain, she began establishing new trade routes through previously inaccessible mountain passes. Settlements that had never been able to trade with Haven's Rest due to dangerous or difficult routes suddenly found themselves connected by dragon-guaranteed safe passage. The economic pressure that Westmarch had hoped would cripple the village instead forced it to innovate and expand its reach. The military pressure began a month later. Bandit raids targeted outlying farms and trade caravans. The attacks were carefully coordinated and suspiciously well-informed about village defenses, clear signs of Westmarch backing. This was where Zephyr's true value became apparent. She didn't just fight off the raiders, she hunted them. Her dragon senses could track them to their hidden camps. Her strength could traverse terrain that would challenge mounted soldiers, and her intelligence allowed her to anticipate their strategies. Within 2 months, every bandit group in the region had either fled or been eliminated. More importantly, Zephyr's tactical methods began to spread. She shared her knowledge of terrain and tracking with the village's defenders, teaching them to think like predators rather than prey. But the most significant change was in the people of Haven's Rest themselves. The external pressure had forged them into something stronger and more unified. They weren't just a collection of families sharing space. They had become a true community with a shared identity and purpose. Children who had grown up listening to Zephyr's stories began incorporating dragon mythology into their games and songs. Adults started adopting her practical approaches to problem-solving. The line between human and dragon culture began to blur in fascinating ways. This cultural evolution reached a turning point during the Festival of First Harvest, a celebration that marked the end of the growing season. Traditionally, it was a purely human affair, but this year the villagers insisted that Zephyra take a central role. The festival began with the traditional blessing of the harvest, but it continued with something entirely new, a ceremony honoring the partnership between human and dragon that had made their prosperity possible. Elena, as the elected festival coordinator, stood before the assembled community with a speech she had spent weeks preparing. 6 months ago, a broken dragon came to our village, she began. She was injured, alone, and cast out by her own people. We helped her heal, and she chose to stay and help us in return. The crowd murmured its agreement. Hundreds of faces turned toward the platform, where Zephyr sat beside the human council members. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about humans helping a dragon or a dragon protecting humans. It became about something bigger, about what we could build together. Elena's voice grew stronger, carrying across the square to every listener. We didn't just gain a guardian. We gained a new way of thinking about community, about strength, about what it means to belong. She gestured toward the expanded village, the new buildings and roads and bridges. This isn't just human achievement or dragon power. This is what happens when different kinds of strength work together toward the same goal. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Zephyra felt her chest tighten with emotion. These people weren't just accepting her. They were celebrating what they had created together. But the speech wasn't over. Today, we face challenges from those who see our success and want to control it, Elena continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. They offer us security in exchange for our independence. They want to use our dragon as a weapon and our village as a resource. We have refused their offer, knowing it might mean hardship and danger. We made that choice because what we've built here is worth defending. Not just the prosperity or the safety, but the idea that different peoples can work together as equals. The cheers grew louder, and Zephyra could see determination in the faces around her. These weren't the fearful villagers who had cowered behind their walls when she first arrived. These were people who had found their strength and were prepared to fight for what they believed in. So tonight, we celebrate not just our harvest, but our choice, Elena concluded. We celebrate the partnership that saved us, strengthened us, and showed us what's possible when we refuse to be afraid. The festival continued late into the night, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from shared purpose. Zephyra found herself swept into the celebrations, her dragon reserve melting away under the infectious happiness of her adopted people. It was near midnight when Thomas approached her, his expression thoughtful despite the festivities around them. I've been thinking about what Elena said, he told her, about what we've built here being bigger than just human-dragon cooperation. What do you mean? Zephyra asked. I think we've accidentally created something revolutionary, he said seriously. A community where worth is determined by contribution rather than birth. Where differences are seen as strengths rather than flaws. Where leadership is earned rather than inherited. He gestured toward the celebrating villagers. Look around. Former city dwellers working alongside farm families. People with disabilities taking leadership roles. Humans and a dragon planning strategy together. This isn't just successful, it's unprecedented. Zephyra followed his gaze, seeing her community with new eyes. He was right. Without consciously trying, they had created something that challenged the basic assumptions of both human and dragon societies. That's why Westmarch really wants to control us, Thomas continued. It's not just about our iron or our trade routes. It's about what we represent. The idea that there might be a better way to organize society. And that makes us dangerous to them, Zephyra realized. Exactly. Which means they won't stop with economic pressure and bandit raids. Eventually, they'll have to try to destroy us completely. Looking out at her adopted home, at the people who had given her purpose and belonging, Zephyra felt a familiar fire kindling in her chest. But this wasn't the desperate anger of her youth or the defensive fury she'd felt when fighting the shadow wolves. This was something calmer and more focused. This was determination. Then, we'll have to be ready for them, she said quietly. Yes, Thomas agreed. But I don't think they understand what they're really facing. What do you mean? Thomas smiled, and in that expression, she could see the quiet confidence that had made him a natural leader. They see a dragon and some stubborn farmers. They don't see what you've taught us, or what we've taught you. They don't understand that we're not the same people we were 6 months ago. As if summoned by their conversation, Elena appeared beside them, slightly breathless from dancing, but glowing with happiness. The council wants to meet tomorrow morning, she told them. We need to start planning for whatever comes next. And what do you think comes next? Thomas asked. Elena's expression grew serious despite the celebration continuing around them. I think Westmarch is about to learn why casting aside someone as valuable as Zephyra was the biggest mistake her people ever made. Looking up at the stars that had witnessed her exile and her redemption, Zephyra silently agreed. The game was just beginning. Zephyra was making her usual patrol around the village perimeter when she spotted the smoke rising from the Miller farmstead, 2 miles east of Haven's Rest. It was the wrong kind of smoke, too thick, too black, carrying the acrid smell of burning thatch, and, worst thing, she didn't want to identify. She reached the farm in minutes, her powerful legs carrying her across the frozen ground faster than any horse could run. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The farmhouse was a smoldering ruin. The barn collapsed, the livestock slaughtered. Of the Miller family, there was no sign except for the tracks leading toward the border, too many booted feet moving in military formation. This wasn't a bandit raid. This was the opening move in Westmarch's real war against Haven's Rest. By the time she returned to the village with news of the attack, the full scope of Westmarch's strategy was becoming clear. 3 more outlying farms had been hit simultaneously. The attacks had been precise, professional, and designed to send a message: submit or watch everything you built burn. The emergency council meeting was the most tense in the village's history. Fear was palpable in the air as reports came in from survivors who had managed to escape the coordinated assault. They took prisoners, reported Sarah Martinez, who had barely escaped when her family's farm was attacked. The soldiers weren't trying to kill everyone. They were rounding people up, taking them toward the Westmarch border. Hostages, Elena said grimly. They want leverage for negotiations. Thomas stood at the head of the council table, his usually calm demeanor strained by the crisis. We all knew this was coming. The question is, what do we do about it? We negotiate, said Councilman Peters, one of the more cautious voices on the council. They've made their point. Maybe we can reach some kind of compromise. There is no compromise with conquest, Marcus Webb replied harshly. The former soldier had been drilling the village militia for months, preparing for exactly this scenario. They'll demand complete submission, and then they'll take our people anyway to ensure our obedience. So what's the alternative? Peter shot back. Fight a professional army with farmers and craftsmen? The debate that followed was heated but brief. Everyone knew that conventional military resistance was hopeless. Westmarch had thousands of trained soldiers, cavalry, siege equipment, and the backing of other city-states. Haven's Rest had a militia of barely 200, mostly farmers with limited combat experience. But they had something Westmarch didn't understand or appreciate. They've made a mistake, Zephyra said quietly, and the room fell silent. They think they're fighting against a human village protected by a dragon. They don't realize they're fighting against something entirely new. She stood, moving to the large map that dominated one wall of the council chamber. It showed the entire region in detail, marked with trade routes, terrain features, and the locations of allied settlements. For months, we've been thinking defensively, she continued, protecting what we have, preparing for siege. But that's not the only way to fight a war. Thomas joined her at the map. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what you taught me on my second day here, Zephyra replied, gesturing to the mountainous terrain that surrounded their valley. About how this village survived for 50 years by being too difficult to control, too remote to bother with. Elena caught on first. You want to make the occupation impossible. Exactly. Westmarch is thinking like a traditional power. Take the center, control the population, extract resources. But what if there's no center to take? She traced her claw along the mountain paths that connected Haven's Rest to dozens of smaller settlements and hidden valleys. We have allies they don't know about. Trade partners who depend on the routes I've opened. People who have prospered because of what we've built here. A network, Thomas breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. More than that, Zephyra continued. A new kind of organization, not a kingdom or city-state, but a confederation of independent communities working together. Mobile, adaptable, impossible to crush because there's no single point of failure. The room buzzed with excited conversation as the implications became clear. This wasn't just a strategy for surviving Westmarch's assault. It was a blueprint for something revolutionary. But first, they had to save the people who had been captured. The rescue mission has to be our immediate priority, Marcus said. Those hostages won't survive long if we don't act fast. Agreed, Zephyr nodded. But we do this smart. No frontal assault, no desperate heroics. We use every advantage we have. The plan they developed over the following hours was unlike anything in conventional military doctrine. It relied on Zephyra's unique capabilities, the detailed knowledge of terrain that the village scouts had developed, and, most importantly, the network of relationships they had built over the past months. 3 days later, Zephyra lay concealed on a ridge overlooking the temporary prison camp, where Westmarch was holding their hostages. The camp was well defended by traditional standards, surrounded by wooden palisades, guarded by professional soldiers, positioned to prevent any obvious approach. But the guards were watching for human attackers coming from predictable directions. They weren't prepared for a dragon who had spent months learning every cave, crevice, and hidden path in the mountain region. The rescue began at midnight. While Zephyra created a diversion on the camp's eastern perimeter, a controlled rockslide that simulated a natural avalanche, teams of village volunteers entered through the cave system that Elena had mapped during her geological surveys. The operation was over in 20 minutes. By the time the Westmarch soldiers realized what was happening, the hostages were already disappearing into tunnel networks that the enemy didn't know existed. No shots were fired, no soldiers were killed, but 37 captured villagers simply vanished into the night. The psychological impact was exactly what they had hoped for. Word spread quickly through the Westmarch forces that their enemies could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning or trace. Morale began to crack as soldiers realized they weren't fighting conventional opponents. But the real masterstroke came 3 days later. Lord Chancellor Marcus had established his field headquarters in the captured town of Mill Creek, confident that his superior forces could pacify the region through overwhelming strength. He was reviewing reports of increasingly frustrated patrols when his aide burst into the command tent. "Sir, you need to see this." The aide led him outside, where a crowd of soldiers was staring upward in amazement. There, carved into the side of the mountain in letters 50 feet tall, was a message visible for miles in every direction. "Your move. Haven's Rest." The carving was precise, professional, and absolutely impossible by any conventional means. It would have taken hundreds of workers months to complete such a project. Yet it had appeared overnight, a demonstration of capabilities that no one in the Westmarch command structure could explain. But the message was more than just psychological warfare. Hidden within the seemingly simple text were detailed intelligence reports, encoded using a system that Thomas had developed based on his experience as a scholar. The message told everyone who knew how to read it exactly where Westmarch forces were positioned, what their strengths and weaknesses were, and how to avoid or counter their patrols. Within hours, every settlement in the region knew more about enemy movements than some of Westmarch's own officers. The military situation deteriorated rapidly for the occupying forces. Supply convoys disappeared on mountain roads that their maps showed as empty wilderness. Patrols sent to secure strategic points found their objectives already evacuated, their equipment relocated to locations that didn't officially exist. Most disturbing of all, The local population seemed to be helping their enemies with enthusiasm rather than resentment. Farmers gladly provided information about troop movements. Merchants refused to sell supplies to West March soldiers. Children played games that somehow always resulted in enemy scouts getting lost in maze-like village streets. It's like fighting a ghost, Colonel Hartwell reported to Lord Chancellor Marcus during their weekly strategy review. We control the major roads and the larger settlements, but we might as well be occupying empty territory for all the good it's doing us. What about the iron mines? Marcus asked. At least tell me we're securing the resources that started this whole enterprise. Hartwell's expression grew even grimmer. The mines are inaccessible. Collapsed tunnels, flooded shafts, equipment sabotaged or removed. Our engineers say it would take months to restore operations, and that's assuming the sabotage stops. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, frustration boiling over. How is this possible? We're talking about farmers and craftsmen. Where did they learn sophisticated guerrilla tactics? The answer, had he known it, was both simpler and more complex than he could imagine. The villagers of Haven's Rest hadn't learned guerrilla tactics from military manuals or experienced commanders. They had learned them from a dragon who thought like a predator. Zephyr's approach to warfare was fundamentally different from human military doctrine. She didn't think in terms of territory to be controlled or enemies to be defeated. She thought in terms of hunting and survival, of using every advantage the environment provided, of striking when and where the target was most vulnerable. More importantly, she had taught the humans to think the same way. The transformation was visible in every aspect of their resistance. Village scouts moved through the mountains like the wild creatures that lived there, appearing and disappearing without leaving tracks. Supply caches were hidden in locations that only someone thinking like a dragon would choose. High places accessible only to those willing to climb, concealed spaces that required non-human senses to detect. But perhaps most significantly, the entire structure of their resistance network was organized around draconic principles. Instead of rigid hierarchies and chain of command, they operated as a living system where information flowed naturally and decisions were made by whoever was best positioned to make them. This became clear during the Battle of Crow's Ridge, 3 weeks into the occupation. A West March column was moving through a narrow valley, confident that their superior numbers and equipment made them invulnerable to attack. They had scouts ahead and behind, cavalry on the flanks, and their route had been carefully chosen to avoid obvious ambush points. They never saw their enemies coming. The attack began with Zephyra herself, striking from above where no human force could reach. But instead of the frontal assault that military doctrine would suggest, she used her dragon abilities to trigger carefully planned avalanches that split the column into isolated segments. Then, the human fighters emerged from concealment. Not from the obvious hiding places that the West March soldiers had been watching, but from positions that only a dragon's three-dimensional thinking could have identified. They struck fast and hard, disabled key equipment and communication systems, and vanished back in a terrain that suddenly revealed itself to be far more complex than it had appeared. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, the West March column was stranded in hostile territory with no supplies, no communications, and no clear understanding of how they had been so completely outmaneuvered. More importantly, every detail of the battle was observed and recorded by hidden watchers who relayed the information to settlements throughout the region. Within hours, the tactical innovations that had proven successful at Crow's Ridge were being adapted and implemented by resistance cells that West March didn't even know existed. The war was evolving in ways that no traditional military strategist could have predicted. Each engagement taught both sides new lessons, but only one side was learning fast enough to keep pace with the changes. That realization, finally, penetrated the West March command structure during a desperate strategy meeting held 6 weeks into the occupation. "We're not winning," Colonel Hartwell announced bluntly. "In fact, we're losing ground every day." Lord Chancellor Marcus wanted to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. His forces controlled less territory than they had at the beginning of the campaign. His supply lines were under constant attack. His soldiers were demoralized and requesting transfers to less dangerous postings. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "I'm suggesting that we've fundamentally misunderstood what we're fighting," Hartwell replied. "This isn't a territorial war or a resource grab. It's something entirely new." He gestured to the maps that covered the command tent's walls, marked with colored pins representing known and suspected enemy positions. "Look at this pattern. They're not trying to hold ground or protect assets. They're trying to change the entire nature of how power works in this region." Ambassador Chun, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they're not building a traditional kingdom or city-state," Hartwell explained. "They're creating something that doesn't have a center to attack, doesn't have a hierarchy to decapitate, doesn't have resources to capture. Every settlement in their network is simultaneously independent and connected. Cut off one, and two more spring up to replace it. That's impossible," Marcus protested. "No organization can function without central authority." "Tell that to them," Hartwell said dryly. "Because they're doing it." The colonel moved to the largest map, pointing to the complex web of connections that intelligence reports had revealed over the past weeks. "They call it the Mountain Confederation. Every community maintains its autonomy, but they share resources, information, and mutual defense through voluntary agreements. And somehow, a broken dragon has convinced dozens of independent settlements to work together more effectively than our professional military can coordinate its own units," Chen added thoughtfully. The implications hung in the air like a challenge to everything the West March leadership thought they knew about governance and power. "So what do we do?" Marcus asked finally. It was a question that would define not just the outcome of their war, but the future of the entire region. And unbeknownst to them, their conversation was being recorded by a small device placed in their command tent by someone they had trusted completely, someone who had realized that the revolution brewing in these mountains was bigger than any of them had imagined. The real war was just beginning. The recording device in Lord Chancellor Marcus's tent had been placed there by someone he would never have suspected. His own aide, Lieutenant Catherine Morris, a young officer who had grown up hearing stories about dragons and had always wondered why the two species remained so distant from each other. Catherine had volunteered for this assignment, hoping to gain experience in diplomatic relations. Instead, she had found herself witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a society that seemed to solve problems her own civilization had struggled with for centuries. 3 days after recording the command staff's desperate strategy meeting, Catherine made a decision that would change the course of the war. Under cover of darkness, she slipped away from the West March camp and made her way toward the mountains where Haven's rest lay hidden. She was captured, of course. The Mountain Confederation scouts were too skilled and too well-coordinated to miss a lone soldier moving through their territory. But instead of being taken to a prison camp or interrogated by hostile captors, she found herself sitting in a comfortable chair in what appeared to be a naturally formed amphitheater carved into the side of a mountain. The woman who questioned her was not what she had expected. Elena Vasquez was young, professional, and obviously intelligent, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions. More surprising was her disability. The crutch she leaned on marked her as someone who would never have been given authority in Catherine's own military culture. "Lieutenant Morris," Elena said, settling into a chair across from her. "You've been trying to reach us for 3 days." "Why?" "Because I have information you need," Catherine replied. "And because I think you might have something my people need as well." "You're offering to betray your own forces?" Catherine shook her head. "I'm offering to prevent a catastrophe that will hurt everyone involved." Before Elena could respond, a shadow fell across the amphitheater. Catherine looked up to see the dragon she had heard so much about descending from the mountain heights. Zephyr's landing was surprisingly graceful despite her malformed wing, and her presence transformed the entire atmosphere of the meeting. "This is the West March officer who's been requesting a meeting?" Zephyr asked. "Lieutenant Catherine Morris," Elena confirmed. She says she has important information for us. Zephyra studied Catherine with intelligent golden eyes that seemed to look right through her. What kind of information? Catherine reached slowly into her jacket, producing the small recording device. Your intelligence network is impressive, but you don't have anyone inside our command structure. You don't know what they're planning next. She activated the device, and the voices of the West March leadership filled the mountain air. As the recording played, Catherine watched the reactions of her captors carefully. Elena's expression grew increasingly concerned, while Zephyra's became thoughtful and calculating. Scorched earth, Elena said grimly when the recording ended. They're planning to destroy everything they can't control. The recording had revealed West March's next phase of strategy. Since they couldn't defeat the Mountain Confederation through conventional means, they would make the entire region uninhabitable. Poisoned wells, burned forests, salted farmland. A campaign of systematic destruction designed to force the population into submission through starvation and desperation. How long do we have? Zephyra asked. The orders go out tomorrow morning, Catherine replied. The first strikes will begin within the week. Why are you telling us this? Elena asked suspiciously. What do you gain by betraying your own people? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, struggling to put her thoughts into words. Because I've been watching this war for 6 weeks, and I've realized something that my commanders refused to see. She gestured toward the hidden settlement that surrounded them, barely visible among the natural rock formations. You're not just fighting for independence or resources. You're proving that there's a better way to organize society. A way where someone like you, she looked at Elena, can be a leader despite your disability. Where a dragon cast out by her own people can find a home. Where different species and cultures can work together as equals. And you think that's worth preserving? Zephyra asked. I think it's the most important thing that's happened in my lifetime, Catherine said honestly. My own civilization is built on rigid hierarchies, on the idea that some people are naturally better than others. But what you've created here suggests that might be wrong. Elena and Zephyra exchanged a meaningful look. They had heard similar words from refugees and defectors who had joined the Confederation over the past months, but never from someone so close to the enemy command structure. What exactly are you proposing? Elena asked. Catherine took a deep breath. I'm proposing that instead of just defending against the coming attack, you take the initiative. Show the people of West March and everyone else who's watching what you're really fighting for. Meaning you save them from their own leaders. The plan that emerged from the discussion that followed was audacious beyond anything the Mountain Confederation had attempted before. Instead of merely surviving West March's scorched earth campaign, they would prevent it by removing the people giving the orders. But this wouldn't be an assassination or a military coup. It would be something far more sophisticated, a demonstration of the Confederation's principles on a scale that couldn't be ignored. The operation began with Catherine returning to the West March camp, carrying modified orders that she claimed came directly from the capital city. The orders were forgeries, but they were based on detailed intelligence about West March's command structure that the Confederation had been gathering for months. According to the false orders, Lord Chancellor Marcus was to report immediately to an emergency meeting with the ruling council. The meeting location was a supposedly secure facility in a neutral zone between West March territory and the mountains, a place where sensitive negotiations could take place without risking either side's security. Marcus suspected a trap, of course, but the orders contained authentication codes that only the highest levels of government should have known. After confirming their apparent authenticity through his own communication channels, he reluctantly agreed to attend. He brought significant security with him, 2 full companies of elite guards, magical protections against various forms of attack, and contingency plans for everything from assassination attempts to hostage situations. What he didn't prepare for was education. The neutral zone facility turned out to be real, but it wasn't what he expected. Instead of a fortress or government building, it was a thriving settlement that had been established according to Confederation principles. Humans and other species worked together in obvious harmony, with leadership roles filled by individuals chosen for competence rather than birth or political connections. Most shocking of all, the settlement was clearly prosperous and well-defended despite having no apparent central authority or military hierarchy. "Welcome to New Haven," Elena said as she met Marcus at the settlement's entrance. "I'm sorry for the deception, but we needed you to see this with your own eyes." Marcus's guards tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but they found themselves surrounded by people who showed no fear or hostility. Children played in the streets, while adults went about their daily business with the casual confidence of people who felt completely secure in their community. "This is impossible," Marcus said, staring at the organized chaos around him. "How do you maintain order without proper authority structures?" "The same way a flock of birds maintains formation without a single leader giving orders," Zephyr said, emerging from a building that appeared to serve as a combination town hall and community center. "Through shared purpose and mutual understanding." The tour that followed challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about governance and society. He saw disputes resolved through community mediation rather than imposed judgment. He watched resources distributed according to need and contribution rather than political favor. Most unsettling of all, he observed people with disabilities and other differences taking leadership roles that his own culture would have denied them. "You drugged me," he said finally, grasping for an explanation that made sense within his worldview. Some kind of mind control magic. "No magic Thomas replied calmly." He had been serving as Marcus's guide through the settlement, explaining the various systems and structures they encountered. Just different assumptions about human nature and social organization. "This can't work on a large scale," Marcus protested. "Maybe in a small village, but real civilization requires hierarchy, requires authority." "Why?" Elena asked simply. The question hung in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Marcus had never questioned the fundamental assumptions of his society because he had never seen an alternative that actually functioned. Because he began, then stopped. Because without clear authority, without someone making the hard decisions, everything falls apart. "Hard decisions are still made here," Zephyr pointed out. "They're just made by the people who will be most affected by the consequences, with input from everyone who has relevant knowledge." They showed him the settlement's decision-making process in action. A dispute had arisen over water rights between two different farming operations, and the community was working through the problem in real time. Instead of a judge or magistrate imposing a solution, the affected parties were working with engineers, farmers, and environmental experts to find an approach that would benefit everyone. The process was messy and more time-consuming than a simple decree would have been, but the eventual solution was creative, comprehensive, and had enthusiastic support from everyone involved. "It's not perfect," Thomas admitted as they watched the meeting conclude. "Democratic processes are slow and sometimes frustrating, but the results tend to be more durable because everyone has input into creating them." Marcus spent 3 days in New Haven observing and asking questions. His guards gradually relaxed as they realized they weren't in danger, and some of them began asking questions of their own. On the third evening, as he sat around a community fire listening to stories and music, Marcus finally voiced the thought that had been growing in his mind. "You're trying to start a revolution," he said to Zephyra. "I'm trying to prove that the revolution is already here," she replied. "The question is whether established powers will adapt to it or be swept aside by it. And if we refuse to change?" Zephyr's expression grew serious. "Then you'll continue fighting an enemy that doesn't exist, trying to conquer territory that can't be held, using methods that only make your real problems worse." She gestured toward the thriving community around them. "This isn't going away, Lord Chancellor. Every success we have, every problem we solve that traditional authorities can't solve, proves to more people that there's a better way. Your Scorched Earth campaign won't stop us," Elena added. "It will just force us to adapt and spread faster. And it will show everyone watching that your kind of power can only sustain itself through destruction." Marcus was quiet for a long time, watching the easy interaction between different species and cultures around the fire. "What do you want from me?" "We wanted to take a message back to your government," Thomas said. "An offer of partnership instead of conquest." Partnership, trade agreements that benefit everyone involved. Mutual defense pacts that protect all our communities. Cultural exchange that lets both sides learn from each other. Elena pulled out a carefully prepared document. "Everything we're offering is written out here, along with the mechanisms for implementation." Marcus took the document with shaking hands. After 6 weeks of military stalemate and growing desperation, his enemies were offering him a path to peace that would actually strengthen Westmarch's position in the region. "Why?" he asked. "Why offer this now, when you have us at a disadvantage?" Zephyra smiled, an expression that transformed her draconic features into something almost human. "Because conquest isn't our goal. Building something better is our goal. And that works better when everyone involved chooses to participate." The return journey to his own forces gave Marcus time to think about everything he had seen and heard. By the time he reached his command tent, he had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. He called off the Scorched Earth campaign. Instead, he sent a message to his government recommending immediate peace negotiations based on the Mountain Confederation's proposal. The message included detailed reports about the alternative social systems he had observed, along with his professional assessment that military conquest of the region was impossible. The response from his superiors was swift and decisive. He was relieved of command and ordered to return to the capital for disciplinary action. But by then, it was too late. Word of the peace proposal had leaked to the civilian population, and for the first time, ordinary citizens of Westmarch began to learn about the alternatives that existed just beyond their borders. The revolution that Zephyra had spoken of was indeed already happening. The only question now was how far it would spread and how quickly. The war was ending, but something much larger was just beginning. 5 years later, the world looked very different from the mountain peaks, where Zephyra stood watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Below her, the valley that had once contained only the small village of Haven's Rest now bustled with activity that would have been impossible to imagine when she first arrived as a broken exile. The Mountain Confederation had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What had begun as a desperate alliance between a few isolated communities had evolved into a network spanning 3 mountain ranges and encompassing over 200 settlements. Trade caravans moved freely along routes that had once been too dangerous to travel, protected by an innovative system of mutual defense agreements. But the physical expansion was only the beginning. The real transformation was in how people thought about community, leadership, and what it meant to belong. Zephyra heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Elena approaching. Her walk much steadier now thanks to the advanced prosthetic that the Confederation's engineers had developed. Elena's official title was Regional Coordinator, but in practice she served as something closer to a roving ambassador, helping new communities integrate into the network and resolve disputes that cross settlement boundaries. "The delegation from the Dragon Council has arrived," Elena announced. "They're asking to speak with you personally." Zephyra felt her heart skip a beat. After 5 years of silence from her birth people, the Dragons of Draconia had finally sent representatives to the Mountain Confederation. She had wondered if this day would ever come. "What do they want?" she asked. "They say they want to discuss formal diplomatic relations," Elena replied. "But, reading between the lines, I think they're here because they're scared." Elena was probably right. The success of the Mountain Confederation had sent ripples throughout the region, challenging traditional assumptions about governance and social organization. Even the mighty dragon civilization couldn't ignore the implications of what was happening in these mountains. They walked together toward the diplomatic center, a beautiful building that combined dragon architectural principles with human engineering techniques. It was one of many structures that reflected the cultural fusion that had become the Confederation's signature characteristic. The delegation waiting for them consisted of 3 dragons, all elder council members that Zephyra recognized from her youth. Elder Pyrith, who had pronounced her exile, stood at their center. His ancient eyes showed no emotion as she approached, but she could sense the tension in his posture. Zephyra Wind Caller, he began, using her old name with obvious reluctance. You have been difficult to locate. I haven't been hiding, she replied calmly. And my name is simply Zephyr now. Indeed, Elder Pyritha's gaze swept across the diverse gathering of humans and other species who had assembled for this historic meeting. We have come to discuss the situation that has developed in this region. What situation would that be? Thomas asked. He was graying now, his face lined with the wisdom of years spent building something unprecedented, but his voice still carried the quiet authority that had made him a natural leader. The disruption of proper order, interjected Elder Stormwind, the youngest member of the dragon delegation. The mixing of species that should remain separate, the elevation of the weak and broken above their natural station. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around the room, Zephyra could feel the tension of humans and dragons confronting worldviews that had seemed incompatible for centuries. And what do you propose we do about this disruption? Zephyra asked quietly. Return to your proper place, Elder Pyrith replied. Renounce this pretense of equality with lesser beings. Accept restoration to your clan and take up a role appropriate to your nature. The offer was stunning. After casting her out with ceremony and finality, the Dragon Council was now offering to take her back. But the price was equally clear. She would have to abandon everything she had built with her human partners. And what about the Mountain Confederation? Elena asked. What happens to the communities that have thrived under our current system? They will return to traditional structures, Elder Stormwind said dismissively. Humans under human leadership, with appropriate guidance from their betters. The natural order will be restored. It was exactly the response Zephyra had expected, and exactly the reason why she had known this confrontation would eventually come. The Dragon Council couldn't tolerate the existence of a successful alternative to their hierarchical society any more than Westmarch had been able to tolerate the challenge to their authority. There's something you need to understand, Zephyra said, moving to stand beside Thomas and Elena rather than facing them alone. I'm not the leader of the Mountain Confederation. None of us are in the way you mean it. Elder Pyrith,